What's up everyone? Today is the time for the first oil change on this bike. I'm going to be doing it myself. The only thing I won't be able to do myself is reset the service interval. If you guys have any tips or tricks on how to do that, please let me know. If there's something I need to buy that won't void my warranty, that will allow me to clear the service interval in the computer, that would be awesome. So today I purchased a couple supplies from my local dealership. All of the O-rings, the crush washer and filter are in this box. And I purchased a Motul 7100 15W50, which is manual spec. Of course, if you buy it from the dealership, they're gonna give you what you need. The service interval for the first oil change on this bike is 650 miles. I'm currently at about 580, so I'm doing it a little bit early, but I have a 140-mile ride tomorrow and I don't want to stop in the middle for an oil change. Some manufacturers do put break-in oil in the engine, which is going to assist with the break-in process. I'm not sure if Ducati does that, but regardless of whether or not they do, we're gonna have some fresh Motul in there starting today. I'm also going to be doing a quick detail of the bike. The thing I like to use here is Mother's bug and tar remover. You spray it on, it foams, and it eats away at any bug, tar, any kind of junk you have on there, and then you wipe it off with a microfiber towel. So let's get into it. This is not really going to be a how-to. There are plenty of videos on how to do it. I just want to walk you through some quick tips and tricks that I have discovered through my ventures on the internet and compile them all into one video in case you want to change your oil too. To change the oil, I'm going to start by removing this bottom fairing right here. To do that, I believe we need some 3mm Allen keys, so I'll pick those up. So to get started, I'm going to use my 3mm Allen key to remove these 4 pieces of hardware. This 5th one on the side is slightly larger than a 3mm. I'll let you know what size that is when I get to it. And then we also have a couple pieces of hardware on the bottom that help fasten this fairing in. This one on the side here looks like it's going to be a 4mm, which is of course the only key I'm missing from my set, so I'm going to find a different key and get going. Looks like these bottom screws are also going to be 4mm. In addition to these 7 pieces of hardware that you have on the bottom and the side, you also have this screw in the front that is a 3mm. You must remove this. If you have a radiator guard, this is the screw that secures that in place. So just go ahead and back it off and you should be able to take your fairing off. So there it is. Now that we've got this fairing off, we gain access to the oil filter, which is housed behind this plate right here. We'll get a socket set, back these 2 bolts off, but first we're going to get something to protect the exhaust from oil spillover, and we're also going to drain the oil first, that way we don't just have senseless oil dripping out of there. In order to get the drain plug off, you're going to need a 14mm socket. I recommend using either deep socket or an extension because the drain bolt is recessed a little bit at an angle, so a shallow socket with a regular ratchet is probably not going to cut it. So now that most of the oil is drained out into the oil pan, if you have your bike on your side stand the way I do and not a stand that's going to level it, you're going to want to make sure that you sit on it, take the kickstand off, sit it upright, kick it this way, kick it back that way, just kind of rock it back and forth a little bit. Make sure you get all the oil out. If you want to let it sit for 15-20 minutes, that's fine too. You can see it's been 5 minutes since I pulled the drain plug and we've still got a little stream going. Just make sure it's all out. One thing I wanted to show you, your bike should come from the factory with one of these magnetic drain plugs. If it doesn't, make sure you pick one up. I think Ducatis, all Ducatis at this point come with them. Just in case they don't, make sure you pick one up because we have a lot of small material magnetized to it. I wish this would focus. I'll throw a picture in here to show you what it looks like up close. In order to change your oil successfully, you're going to need a few things. So the oil filter, of course, 2 of these O-rings, which are for the housing cover on the side, which we're going to take off here shortly, a new crush washer, which goes right on the drain bolt. Mine fell into the oil, so I'm not going to be able to retrieve that just yet until I dump this oil. Just make sure it's not still on the drain outlet right here. because you don't want to have two crush washers on there at the same time. As long as you don't have one still on the bike, it probably just fell into your oil. Just make sure of that. And of course you need your oil. So I'm going to set this bike upright a little bit, make sure more of the oil drains out, and then I'm going to transfer the oil from this crappy drain pan over to my real one that's under the CRF currently. I'm pretty sure a majority of the oil has drained out already, but just to be sure, I'm going to let this sit for 20 minutes. While we do that, I'm going to remove this oil filter. So while we're removing that, it's going to allow more of the oil to drain down into the oil pan. And after we let it sit a little longer, I'm going to rock it side to side, just like I did in that previous clip, to make sure all of the oil is out from every angle. We'll put the drain plug back in with a new crush washer, and then we will install a new oil filter and get more oil up in there. This foil is going to be used to protect the exhaust from oil spilling out of the oil filter housing. So we're going to tuck this foil right in between here so that the oil runs off onto this rug instead of onto the exhaust. So now in order to get this cover off of the engine, we're going to use these two, I believe they're M8 screws that were previously used to fasten the passenger foot pegs to the bike. Now how this works, there are larger threads on the cover itself. They are larger than that of the screws that fasten it to the engine. So this passes right through these threads without any effect. For this step, I'm going to use a 6mm Allen key, and I will tighten up on each one until it is touching the engine. And then from there, I will crank on them back and forth in increments to make sure that the cover comes off evenly. So I can feel that they are both making contact with the engine. So now we are going to start pulling this cover off. Now, as you can see, it is slowly pulling off of the engine. So we'll continue to work it back and forth until both O-rings are free, or until we can pull it by hand. All right, so now you can see there's a pretty good gap there. It feels pretty loose, so I should be able to just pop it right off, and there we go. So now that I've got this cover off, I can do a couple things. I'm going to start off by removing the screws that I used to pull it off. Set those aside. I can put those back on the shelf with the passenger foot pegs that I will never use. Now we're going to use these two O-rings provided by the dealer to swap these out. If you don't have a plastic O-ring tool, I wouldn't recommend using something like a metal one because you could score the surface, and you definitely want to keep those mating surfaces clear of any scratches and debris. So a trick I've used before when rebuilding Mercedes and BMW oil filters is a zip tie. So cut the end off the zip tie that it's like a little bit softer and it's got an angle to it. Just cut that off and then stick this in between. And you know that plastic is not going to score or scratch aluminum, so you should be pretty safe doing this. Stick it underneath just like that, and then you can loop it around and pull the O-ring right off. And we'll do the same for the other one. Feed it through and then pull it right off. Make sure you don't mix them up. These are the two old ones. We'll set these aside and toss them. If you want to give this a light cleaning, you can, but as long as you don't see any debris in there, you're good. General rule of thumb whenever you're doing any kind of oil work is to lightly coat the O-rings in oil. This will make them install and remove easier, as well as create a more effective seal. So I'll dip my finger in some oil, prime these up, and reinstall them. When you're reinstalling these O-rings, you want to make sure that you don't stretch them over. Just try to work them over the edge without stretching them out, because you can cause them to deform in such a way that would make them kind of useless. So we'll feed this one over. I started off with the closest one to the edge first, so that way the second one will just roll right over it. So using the pick tool, I will get right on the inner lip right here on the filter and just pop it right out. You'll get a little bit of oil dripping out of there after you remove the filter, so make sure you still have your protection there. We are now going to take our fresh oil filter and insert it into the housing. You want to make sure that you insert the open end. One end is closed off. This is the side that should be facing out, and you have the open end, which is going to pop right in there. So when you're inserting the oil filter, you should feel it kind of suck in or pop in. So we'll insert it, and then you'll kind of feel it pop in. I'm going to make sure that the text is upright when I install it. It doesn't appear to have an orientation, but just in case it does, I want to make sure that it's upright. So I will put it right there. Especially when working with metal components, you never want to start screws with a tool, whether it be a wrench, a socket, or a power tool, because you could cross thread them. You always want to start them by hand if you can. So I will feed these through and get the thread started with my fingertips. Once I know that I have good thread engagement, I'll go ahead and get back on the wrench and snug them down. I now have these two screws pretty much finger tight. I'm gonna get my torque wrench on them and torque them down to 8 Newton meters as per the manual spec. Now that we've got this torque down, you can give it a little visual inspection. Just make sure that the plate is sitting flat on the engine cover. I'm going to dry these cables that got a little bit of oil on them. Just make sure that there's no oil sitting around anywhere. We are now going to sit the bike upright. It's been about 30 minutes since I pulled the drain plug, so we should get a little bit more oil out of there. As y'all can see, we didn't get a whole lot more oil that time around, so I'm pretty comfortable in saying that most of the oil is out of this bike. We are now going to install the drain plug with the metal shavings cleaned off and a new crush washer. Now that we no longer need access to this side of the bike, I'm going to stick this fairing back on. As you can see in the previous clip, I gave it a wipe down with that Mother's product. So we'll get those screws installed and move on to filling the oil. I just referenced the manual to make sure. If you change the oil with the filter, you should be putting 3.8 liters back in there. So I'll pop this open, and then we'll get our funnel set up and fill this up with 3.8 liters. All right, so that right there is just about 3.8 liters. Like I said, it's pretty late right now, so I can't pull this out and start it up. So I will do that in the morning off camera. But there are a couple steps you want to take to make sure that you're actually at the correct level. Part of that is the bike being upright, run it for a few minutes, stuff like that. So I'll take care of that in the morning. I will move on to a quick how-to of how I take the grime off a bike like this. All right, so quick how-to on how I usually do a weekly cleaning on this bike. I use a product called Mother's Speed Bug and Tar Remover. I will start from the top of the bike, which is usually the cleanest, and work my way down. That's generally how I clean my car or my bike, but if you have multiple microfiber towels and you have one that you like to use on the bottom and one that you like to use on the top, that's fine, but I start off on the top because that's usually where it's cleanest. So you basically just take this Mothers and you spray it on. You might want to test it on certain areas, certain materials to make sure that's not going to cause any damage, but I've used this on multiple vehicles and I've never had any issues. So shake it up, give it a nice spray down. This is a product that you don't want to let dry, so make sure that you're not doing this in direct sunlight, because once this stuff dries, there's no telling what it could do to your paint, so make sure you're doing it indoors if you can. And then once it foams up, I like to wipe it down with a thick, high quality microfiber towel. If you have any spot areas where you have small amounts of tar or some really big bugs, I would have a separate cloth for that, but since the bike isn't too dirty, I'm pretty comfortable using the same towel for the whole bike. There's nothing really on here that's going to get stuck or trapped in the rag. The stuff that I like about this Mothers product is you don't really need a hose. So if you live in an apartment complex or if you're doing this on a trip or anything and you have a can of that in your backpack, you don't need water. You can just spray it on there. It will absorb into whatever kind of junk you have on there. And by the time you go to wipe it off, it's already ready to come off. So your risk to your paint is pretty low. And that's something that I really like about this product. So now I'll just move on to this side, skip to the other side, and then we'll get this wrapped up. All right, we've got fresh oil in there, fresh oil change, ready to go, nice and clean on the outside. We're gonna check the oil level in the morning after running it, and we'll be ready to go for the ride. Thanks for tuning in today, y'all.